I've covered fights in 17 countries. I've seen blood on canvas in Manila, broken ribs in Bangkok, and unconscious bodies carried out of arenas in São Paulo. I thought I'd seen it all. I thought I understood what happens when two men step into a ring with bad intentions. I was wrong. What I witnessed that night in 1967 wasn't a fight. It wasn't even a match. It was something older, something that doesn't belong in a world with referees and rules and medical staff standing by. It was the kind of thing that makes you realize civilization is just a thin coat of paint over something much darker. The venue was a mid-sized arena in Oakland. Not one of those glittering Las Vegas spectacles. This was working-class territory, concrete floors and metal folding chairs, the kind of place where serious people came to watch serious fighting. The crowd was mixed, unusually so for that time. Chinese families sat alongside white dock workers. Black students from the university filled a whole section near the back. Everyone had heard the rumors. Everyone wanted to see if they were true. Bruce Lee was already known in certain circles. Not famous, not yet, but known. The martial arts community whispered his name with a particular kind of respect. I'd seen him demonstrate once 2 years earlier at a tournament in Long Beach. What struck me then wasn't the speed, though that was remarkable. It was the precision. Every movement had purpose. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative. He moved like someone who understood that fighting wasn't performance. It was problem-solving with your body. But demonstrations are one thing. A ring is another. His opponent that night was a boxer named Tommy Stevenson. 6'2", maybe 210 pounds, with the kind of build that made photographers happy and opponents nervous. He'd compiled a decent record fighting out of a gym in Sacramento. 15 wins, 3 losses, most of them by knockout. He had heavy hands and the confidence that comes from knowing you can end a fight with a single clean shot. The promotional material billed it as East meets West. That kind of lazy framing was common then. It sold tickets. What the promoters didn't advertise was that Stevenson had been vocal, very vocal, about his opinions on martial arts. He told anyone who would listen that all the kata and forms and philosophical talk was just dancing. He said, real fighting happened with fists, Western style, and everything else was for movies. Some of his quotes had made it into the local papers. I'd read them. They had an edge that went beyond sport. There was contempt in them, the kind that makes you wonder what's really being said. I arrived 3 hours before the fight. The arena was already filling. I found my spot, ringside, close enough to hear the impact of leather on skin, close enough to see the micro-expressions that television cameras miss. I had my notebook, my pen, my tape recorder, standard equipment. I thought I was there to document a sporting event. The undercard fights were competent, but forgettable. A couple of local kids trading jabs. A middleweight bout that went to decision, the usual rhythm of these things. The crowd was polite but distracted. Everyone was waiting. When Bruce Lee entered, the temperature in the room changed. He wore simple black pants and a fitted top. No robe, no showmanship. He walked to the ring like he was walking to work. His face was composed, but not blank. There was alertness in his eyes, the kind you see in people who are always reading their environment, always calculating. Stevenson came out differently. He had a whole entrance, music and lights, a silk robe with his name embroidered on the back. He played to the crowd, raising his gloved fists, grinning. When he climbed through the ropes, he took his time, making sure everyone got a good look at the size difference. He had at least 4 inches and 30 pounds on Lee. He wanted you to notice. The referee called them to the center for instructions. Standard procedure: touch gloves, return to corners, wait for the bell. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but as they stood there, I noticed Stevenson wasn't looking at Lee. He was looking past him, scanning the crowd, still performing. Then he did something I didn't immediately understand. As he turned to go back to his corner, he pivoted slightly and his right foot came down on something near the edge of the canvas. It was small, maybe 12 inches across, folded neatly and placed just inside the ring boundary. A Chinese flag. I hadn't noticed it before. Someone, probably from Lee's corner, must have placed it there, a small gesture of cultural pride in a setting where such things were rare. Stevenson's foot pressed down on it deliberately. Not a stumble, not an accident. He looked down as he did it, then looked up at Lee with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. The arena went quiet in a way I've never experienced before or since. Not the quiet of anticipation. The quiet of collective shock, of several hundred people simultaneously realizing they'd just witnessed a boundary being crossed. Even the loud drunks in the cheap seats shut up. I was watching Bruce Lee's face when it happened. I've thought about that moment 10,000 times since. I've tried to describe it to colleagues, to students, to other journalists. I always fail. Words aren't built for what I saw. His expression didn't change in the way you'd expect. There was no anger flash, no grimace, no clenching of the jaw. Instead, something went still, deeply, profoundly still. His eyes, which had been alert and measuring, became something else. Fixed, absolute, like a switch had been thrown somewhere behind them and a different system had come online. I'd heard the phrase before, in translated martial arts texts, in conversations with old masters who'd seen combat in China, in Japan, in Korea. Killing intent, satsui in Japanese, the presence of the will to end a life made manifest in the body, readable to anyone with eyes. I'd always thought it was metaphor, poetic exaggeration. It wasn't. The referee was still talking, still going through his standard speech about low blows and back-of-head shots, but nobody was listening. Stevenson had returned to his corner, his grin wider now, feeding off the crowd's reaction. His trainer was saying something to him, probably telling him to forget the theatrics and focus on the fight. Bruce Lee hadn't moved. He stood in the center of the ring, exactly where the referee had left him, staring at the spot where the flag lay crumpled under the impression of Stevenson's boot. The referee touched his shoulder, trying to guide him back to his corner. Lee didn't respond. For 3, maybe 4 seconds, he was completely unreachable, locked inside whatever calculation or reckoning was taking place in his mind. When he finally moved, it was with the same controlled precision as before. He walked to his corner. He let his trainer check his gloves. He rolled his shoulders once, twice, but the stillness was still there, underneath everything, coiled and waiting. I looked around the arena. The crowd had started murmuring again, but it was different now, nervous. People were shifting in their seats, leaning toward their neighbors, whispering questions that had no good answers. The fight hadn't even started yet, and already the night had taken on a quality none of us could name. The ring announcer was doing his job, booming voice echoing through the space, introducing the fighters, listing their records, building false drama. But the real drama was already happening in the silence between the words, in the space between two men who were about to collide, for reasons that had nothing to do with sport. I checked my tape recorder. It was running. I had no idea what I was about to witness, but I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to capture every second of it. The bell was about to ring, and Bruce Lee was still staring at Tommy Stevenson with eyes that had stopped being human and become something else entirely. The bell rang with a sound that seemed too thin for what it was supposed to signify. In a normal fight, that sound releases tension, triggers movement, starts the dance of testing and measuring that experienced fighters do in the first round. This wasn't a normal fight. Bruce Lee came out of his corner with a speed that made the ring girl flinch as she was still leaving the canvas. Not rushing, not wild, but moving with such immediate purpose that the distance between him and Stevenson collapsed before Stevenson's guard was fully up. I'd seen fast fighters before, Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali in his prime, men who could make you miss and make you pay. This was different. Lee crossed the ring like he was simply deciding to be in a different location, and his body obeyed instantly. Stevenson got his hands up just in time, a boxer's reflex, elbows tucked, gloves protecting his face. Lee didn't throw a punch. He stopped just outside Stevenson's range, completely still again, that same terrible stillness from before. Watching, reading. His eyes moved across Stevenson's body like he was taking inventory of vulnerable points, cataloguing them, prioritizing them. Stevenson jabbed, a good jab, technically sound, the kind that had probably scored points in a dozen fights. Lee's head wasn't there when the glove arrived. He'd moved maybe 3 inches, a micro-adjustment that made Stevenson's fist pass through empty air. No wasted motion, no dramatic weaving. just absolute efficiency. Stevenson jabbed again, then followed with a right cross, putting his weight into it. Lee slipped both punches with the same minimal movement, his feet barely shifting, and then I saw something that made me stop writing mid-sentence in my notebook. Lee's hands were at his sides, not up in a guard, not chambered for a strike, just hanging loose, open, relaxed. He was giving Stevenson a completely unprotected target, and somehow Stevenson couldn't hit it. The crowd was making noise now, but it was confused noise, uncertain energy. People didn't know how to read what they were seeing. Stevenson was the aggressor, throwing punches, moving forward. By conventional scoring, he should have been winning. But everyone in that arena could feel that something was wrong with that interpretation. Stevenson threw a combination, 3 punches in quick succession, and for the first time he connected. A glancing shot to Lee's shoulder. It should have been meaningless, a punch that barely landed, but Stevenson's whole face changed when his glove made contact. I was close enough to see it. Recognition. Fear. It was like hitting a steel post wrapped in skin. No give, no absorption, just density. Lee still hadn't thrown a strike. 30 seconds had passed, maybe 40. In boxing, in any combat sport I'd covered, this would be the moment where the commentators would be questioning the fighter's strategy, wondering why he wasn't engaging. But Lee was engaging, just not in any way the sport recognized. He was breaking Stevenson psychologically. Every punch Stevenson threw and missed, every attack that hit nothing but air, every moment Lee stood there with that fixed stare and those open hands, it accumulated. Pressure, doubt, the creeping understanding that nothing Stevenson had trained for was going to work tonight. Stevenson backed up for the first time. A small step, just creating distance, resetting. Lee followed, matching the distance exactly, maintaining the same gap. Stevenson circled left. Lee mirrored him. Stevenson feinted a jab. Lee didn't react to the feint. He only moved when the real punch came, which meant he could read Stevenson's intentions before they manifested in action. I'd interviewed enough fighters to know what was happening in Stevenson's head right then. He was recalculating. All his preparation, all his confidence in his size and power and professional record, it was being systematically dismantled by a man who hadn't even hit him yet. The first minute of the round ended. In a 3-minute round, that's just the beginning, the feeling out phase. But I could see Stevenson's trainer screaming instructions from the corner, wild gestures, pointing at Lee, pointing at Stevenson's gloves. The message was clear. Stop fucking around and hit him. Stevenson tried. He really tried. He planted his feet and threw an overhand right with everything he had, the kind of punch that ends fights in highlight reels. Lee moved inside it, so close to Stevenson that the punch passed over his shoulder, and for half a second they were face to face, inches apart. I heard what Lee said. I was that close. 3 words, quiet enough that maybe only Stevenson and I heard them. You chose this. Then Lee was gone, back to his distance, hands still down, still watching with those fixed eyes. Stevenson threw everything after that, hooks, uppercuts, combinations, wild swings powered by frustration and growing panic. The crowd was roaring now, sensing blood even though no blood had been drawn. Lee made Stevenson miss every significant shot. A few glancing blows landed, enough that the referee wouldn't stop it for non-engagement, but nothing that mattered. And then, with maybe 30 seconds left in the first round, Lee stopped moving away. Stevenson threw a jab. Lee stepped into it, accepting the punch on his forearm, and in the same motion his right hand came up. Not fast in the way people think of speed, not a blur, but inevitable, precise. His palm strike hit Stevenson square in the sternum. The sound was wrong. Flesh hitting flesh shouldn't sound like that. It was a thud, deep and percussive, the kind of impact you feel in your own chest even when you're just watching. Stevenson's forward motion stopped instantly, completely. He didn't stumble backward or bend over or show any of the normal reactions to a body shot. He just stopped, frozen mid-step, his face going pale under the ring lights. The referee was watching closely, hands ready to intervene, but Stevenson was still standing, still technically in the fight. His mouth was open, trying to draw breath that wasn't coming easily. Lee had stepped back to his distance, Hands down again, watching. I'd covered bare-knuckle fights in places where rules were suggestions. I'd seen men hit with pool cues, chair legs, fists wrapped in chain. I'd never seen a single strike change the atmosphere of a room the way that palm strike did. Because now everyone knew. Stevenson knew. His corner knew. The referee knew. The drunk guys in the cheap seats knew. Bruce Lee had been holding back. Everything before that moment had been testing, measuring, proving a point. That single strike was just a demonstration, a tiny glimpse of what would happen if he chose to actually fight. The round bell rang. Stevenson walked to his corner, but his walk was different, mechanical. His trainer grabbed him, sat him down, started yelling instructions, waving smelling salts, trying to bring him back from wherever that palm strike had sent his consciousness. Bruce Lee sat in his corner and didn't look at his trainer. He was staring across the ring at Stevenson with the same expression as before. Nothing had changed in his eyes. The killing intent was still there, patient and absolute. I looked down at my notebook. I'd stopped writing coherent sentences, just fragments. Not boxing, not sparring, something else. Crowd knows. Stevenson broken. The 1-minute rest period felt like it lasted an hour. I watched Stevenson's chest heaving, watched his trainers' increasingly desperate attempts to rally him, watched the confusion and concern spreading through the faces in Stevenson's corner, and I watched Bruce Lee sit perfectly still, conserving energy, waiting with the patience of something that has already decided how this ends and is just allowing the necessary time to pass before the conclusion arrives. The 10-second warning sounded. Both fighters stood. Stevenson tried to look confident, rolling his shoulders, bouncing on his toes. But it was performance now, hollow theatre. His eyes told a different story. The bell rang for round 2. And this time, when Bruce Lee came out of his corner, his hands weren't at his sides anymore. They were up, ready, positioned with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. The arena held its breath. Stevenson came out cautious this time, guard tight, moving laterally instead of forward. His trainer had probably told him to box, to use his reach, to keep Lee at the end of his jab and pile up points. Sound strategy against most opponents, textbook even. Lee walked straight at him. Not aggressive, not rushing, just walking forward with absolute commitment to the direction, like a man crossing a street who knows the cars will stop. Stevenson circled right, trying to maintain distance. Lee adjusted his angle, cutting off the ring with the kind of spatial awareness that takes most fighters years to develop. Every step Stevenson took to create space, Lee took away with better positioning. It was only then, watching Lee methodically compress Stevenson's operating room, that I understood something I should have seen earlier. This wasn't a fight between a martial artist and a boxer. This was a fight between someone who understood violence as geometry and someone who only understood it as athletics. Stevenson threw a jab to stop Lee's advance. Lee's left hand came up, not to block but to redirect, palm meeting Stevenson's glove and guiding it past his head with minimal effort. No wasted energy, just precise vector adjustment, and in that microsecond, while Stevenson's jab was extended and his right hand was still chambered, Lee struck, a straight punch, right hand, directly down the center line. It hit Stevenson's face before his jab had fully retracted. The speed wasn't superhuman, it was predictive. Lee had known where Stevenson's guard would be, and had threaded the gap that didn't exist yet, but would exist by the time his fist arrived. Stevenson's head snapped back, not dramatically, not like in the movies, just a sharp, precise movement that told everyone who understood fighting that the punch had landed clean and hard. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of Stevenson's mouth. The crowd erupted. That first real damage, that first visible mark, it gave them permission to release the tension that had been building. But I wasn't watching the crowd. I was watching Bruce Lee's face, and what I saw there was more frightening than any expression of rage could have been. Nothing had changed. No satisfaction, no excitement, no increase in aggression. The same fixed stare, the same terrible stillness beneath the movement. He'd hurt Stevenson and registered the information the way you might notice a gauge reading in an experiment. Data point received, hypothesis confirmed, proceeding to next phase. Stevenson tried to clinch, a boxer's instinct when hurt, Get close, tie up the arms, buy time for the head to clear. Lee didn't let him. The moment Stevenson reached for him, Lee's hands were there, not grabbing but striking. Short punches to the ribs, elbows to the solar plexus, knees coming up when Stevenson bent forward from the body shots. The referee should have separated them, should have called for a break in the clinch. But this wasn't a clinch in the way boxing defines it. Lee wasn't holding, he was working. And Stevenson was trying to survive the worst real estate decision he'd ever made, getting close to someone who fought better at zero distance than most people fight at any distance. They separated, or rather Lee allowed separation, stepping back cleanly when Stevenson shoved desperately away. Stevenson was breathing hard now, his chest heaving, his guard lowered slightly from fatigue or pain or both. 40 seconds into the second round and he already looked like he'd been fighting for an hour. Lee's breathing was unchanged, steady, controlled. He'd thrown maybe 20 strikes in the last exchange and showed no sign of exertion. I glanced at the timekeeper. 2 minutes and 20 seconds left in the round, an eternity. Stevenson tried to reset, backing to the ropes using the physical barrier to prevent Lee from circling behind him. Another mistake. Lee moved forward and to the left, angling Stevenson into the corner, where the ropes met at 90 degrees and options disappeared. Stevenson realized too late what was happening. He tried to pivot out, but Lee was already there, cutting off the escape, and now Stevenson's back was to the turnbuckle with nowhere to go. What happened next lasted maybe 5 seconds, but contained enough technical precision to fill a training manual. Lee's left hand snapped out, a finger jabbed towards Stevenson's eyes. Stevenson's hands came up reflexively to protect his face. Lee's right hand drove into the exposed ribs, a punch that made Stevenson's whole torso compress. Stevenson's guard dropped to protect his body. Lee's left hand struck his face, an open palm slap that wasn't about damage but about disorientation, about scrambling Stevenson's ability to track incoming attacks. Stevenson tried to cover up completely, both gloves over his face in a defensive shell. Lee swept his lead leg, and suddenly Stevenson was off balance. His weight shifted, his structure compromised. The whole sequence was a conversation in violence. Lee asked questions with his strikes and Stevenson's body gave answers, and Lee used those answers to ask the next question. There was no wasted movement, no repetition, no predictable pattern, just constant adaptation, constant problem-solving, constant pressure. The referee finally stepped in, pushing between them, giving Stevenson a standing 8 count. It was a mercy, technically within the rules, but also an acknowledgement that what was happening in that corner wasn't sporting competition anymore. Stevenson nodded when the referee asked if he could continue. He had to nod. His pride demanded it. But his eyes were different now. Glazed slightly, the brightness gone, replaced by the dull shine of someone reassessing fundamental assumptions about their own capabilities. The referee wiped Stevenson's gloves and waved them back together. Lee didn't rush in. He walked forward at the same measured pace as before, patient, inevitable. Stevenson tried to jab to establish some offense, some presence in the fight. Lee slipped it and countered with a kick, low, to Stevenson's lead leg, right above the knee. It wasn't a knockout technique, wasn't flashy, it was systematic destruction of mobility. Stevenson's leg buckled slightly. He recovered, but his stance was narrower now, less mobile, compromised. Lee kicked the same spot again, then again, each impact precise, hitting the exact same point, accumulating damage, degrading function. I'd seen leg kick specialists in Muay Thai fights in Thailand. They worked the legs with brutal efficiency, chopping down opponents over 15 rounds. Lee was doing the same thing but compressed, concentrated, each kick landing with such precision that 3 felt like 30. Stevenson tried to check one of the kicks, lifting his shin to block. Lee adjusted mid-motion, the kick hitting Stevenson's thigh instead, and before Stevenson's foot touched down, Lee had closed the distance and thrown a combination, hands and elbows, high and low, a flowing sequence that made Stevenson retreat backward into the ropes. The crowd was screaming now, a constant roar that had no breaks, no pauses for breath. They weren't cheering for anyone specifically anymore. They were just reacting to the intensity, the relentlessness, the sense that they were watching something historic and terrible. Stevenson bounced off the ropes and tried to throw a desperate hook, putting everything into it, hoping for the lucky shot that changes fights. Lee didn't dodge. He stepped inside the arc of the punch, too close for the hook to land with power, and drove his shoulder into Stevenson's chest while simultaneously sweeping his legs. Stevenson went down, not knocked out, not knocked down in the technical sense, but tripped, dumped, his balance taken away by someone who understood leverage and timing better than he understood his own name. The referee immediately waved his arms, signaling a slip, not a knockdown, no count necessary. But everyone watching knew the truth. Lee had put him down. Whether it counted on the scorecards was irrelevant to the reality of what had happened. Stevenson got up quickly, trying to show he wasn't hurt, that it was just a slip, nothing significant. But his corner was screaming at him, and I could read lips well enough to know they were telling him to tie up, to survive, to get to the bell. 40 seconds left in the round. Lee came forward again. Always forward. Never retreating, never circling away, just constant pressure. Stevenson jabbed. Lee walked through it, accepting the punch on his forehead, a place where the skull is thick and a glove does minimal damage, and countered with a straight punch that went right through Stevenson's guard and caught him on the cheek. Stevenson's legs wavered. For a moment I thought he'd go down, really down, unconscious, but he grabbed Lee, held on, tied up the arms, desperate. The referee moved in to break them, and in that moment, with the referee between them, with Stevenson's eyes showing white around the edges, with blood running from his nose and his mouth and a cut that had opened over his eye, Bruce Lee did something I'll never forget. He smiled. Not a happy smile. Not cruel either. Something else. Satisfaction maybe, but cold, distant. The smile of someone who had proven a point and felt no need to drive it home further. The smile of someone who had shown mercy by not doing everything they could have done. The bell rang, ending the second round. Stevenson stumbled to his corner. His trainer grabbed him, sat him down hard, started working on the cuts, yelling at him, slapping his face to keep him focused. The cut man was frantically applying ice and then swell, trying to control the swelling that was already distorting Stevenson's face. Bruce Lee walked to his corner, sat down calmly, took a sip of water, and looked across the ring with the same expression as before. The killing intent was still there. Patient. Waiting. And I realized, watching Stevenson's corner frantically trying to put him back together, watching the doctor climb into the ring to examine the cuts, watching Stevenson's eyes drift and refocus and drift again, that the fight might not make it to a third round. The doctor examined Stevenson's face under the harsh ring lights, tilting his head left and right, checking his eyes, asking questions I couldn't hear over the crowd noise. Stevenson answered, nodding, insisting he could continue. His trainer was saying something urgent in his ear, one hand gripping his shoulder. Then the doctor stepped back and made a cutting motion with his hand. The referee called it. Technical stoppage. The fight was over. The crowd's roar turned confused, angry even. They'd paid to see a conclusion, not a mercy killing. But I understood. The doctor had seen what I'd seen, what everyone ringside had seen. One more round and Stevenson wouldn't just be hurt, he'd be damaged in ways that don't heal. Bruce Lee stood in his corner, still expressionless. No celebration, no raised arms, no victory lap. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect to no one in particular, and left the ring the same way he'd entered it, walking to work, walking home. I watched Stevenson's team help him through the ropes, supporting his weight, guiding him down the steps. He'd come in as a professional boxer with a solid record, and walked out as someone who'd learned that everything he knew about fighting was incomplete. The crumpled Chinese flag was still on the canvas where it had fallen. Someone from the ring crew picked it up, folded it carefully, handed it to someone in Lee's departing group. I sat there for a long time after the arena emptied, staring at my notes, trying to find words for what I'd witnessed. I never did find them. Not really. Some things exist beyond language, beyond sport, beyond the neat categories we use to make sense of violence. That night, I saw killing intent, not metaphor, not exaggeration, the real thing. And I understood why Bruce Lee had spent his whole life learning to control it.